Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's live stream. I thought I'd start a few seconds earlier just to make sure everything's working okay. I've actually changed the microphone for this week, so I'm hoping that some of the people who had issues in the past with the volume, I'm hoping that that's all fixed now. So actually, if you're watching this live, if you could actually just say or just confirm that the volume's okay and the audio is working fine at your end. So as usual, this is our weekly recap and market outlook for next week. We only spend a bit of time on PowerPoint. Most of the time we'll spend on the trading platform looking at all the different markets. So we'll look at our usual collection of major markets. I'll talk about some markets that I personally have found interesting. Then we'll go into the questions and go through any markets that you aren't looking at. So we'll run for about an hour as usual. So it's 2:30 UK time, so we'll carry on to about 3:30 US time. Clearly, a lot going on. The last 24, 48 hours, some big moves in markets. So loads to look at. If you're watching this and you're not subscribed to us, if you could click on subscribe, because you're watching it on YouTube anyway, so you can. If you can just click on subscribe, that'd be great. We're only 3,000 subscribers away from 100,000, the magic number. And let's see if we can get there next month. Right, let's just go through some housekeeping first of all. We need to do a risk warning. The presentation is only for educational purposes. This presentation does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones and Capital.com accept no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. Spread bets and CFDs are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 71.2% of retail investors lose money when spread betting and or trading CFDs. This provider, you should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Now Nicholas is here, we can start properly and get into the meat of today. So welcome everybody. We have an offer. We always do an offer on these things, these live streams. So today's offer, I think it's a good. It's well timed actually. The S&P 500. So if you're an existing client or you open an account today and you're trading the S&P, you get zero spreads. And clearly serious declines in stock markets yesterday because of the bond yields. I'll talk a bit about that today. Then we'll get into the markets. So just if you're new to this, we look at the major indices, the major currencies, gold, silver, oil, and Bitcoin. So you don't need to request those in the chat. But if there's anything else you want looking at that's a bit out of the ordinary, we'll take a look at those. So put those in the chat. I will go back through all the chat and have a look at what people have requested as we're going through this. So you don't need to keep spamming the chat with, please can we look at silver? Put it in once and I will go back and have a look. So a load has happened the last 24 hours to do with bond yields. Let's talk about that before we get into the stuff here. Let's have a look at maybe the S&P first of all. So we had big declines in stock markets yesterday, and all sorts of markets really. If you look at the pound against the dollar, for example, another popular market in recent live streams, big declines there as well. And it was because US bond yields jumped, and there's a feeling that perhaps, I think a couple of things, that perhaps the US Federal Reserve, the central bank, are being perhaps a bit too relaxed about interest rates and everything else down here. I think that the yield on bonds has yesterday was slightly higher than the yield on the S&P 500, the dividend yield. So there's a feeling that perhaps it will tempt investors to switch out of stocks, and perhaps inflation is going to be a much bigger problem than anybody thinks in the next few years. So it really spooked markets yesterday. It had a massive effect on my P&L and an effect on this P&L as well. I'm going to talk a bit about. I've got some more trading insights this week as well. I've actually done a bit of research on all the trades I've done on this account going back 18 months. So I've got a few insights to share there. But when we did this a year ago, the equity position on this account, a week ago, the equity position on the account was £17,000. On Wednesday, it was at 17,700. So we'd made an extra 700 quid on existing trades. And you can see it's dropped back to where it is now, about 16,700. I have seen a similar, a bit more dramatic swing around in my own P&L. But yeah, yesterday was did sort of feel like it came out of nowhere. But I wonder if it's opportunities for next week, because a lot of these markets were getting overstretched. So I think it's really interesting going into March. But more of that when we look at markets. So important events for next week. There's one major event, but before we get to that, Tuesday, 2nd of March next week, European inflation data. Wednesday, 3rd of March. And that might be interesting, that inflation data, given that suddenly markets are worried in the last day or so about inflation. Wednesday, 3rd of March, Australia's GDP. The Aussie dollar been performing really well recently. It's been hit a bit the last 24 hours. We'll take a look at that. Thursday, 4th of March, the Fed chairman Powell speaks. So that could be interesting, given, again, what's been going on with the market over the last 24 hours, concerns about maybe the Fed isn't concerned enough about inflation. Be interesting to see what he says if he tries to calm markets next week. Friday, 5th of March, US non-farm payrolls, the big one. It's normally the big one. It's got perhaps less of an impact these days because there's so much going on. But US unemployment numbers next Friday. So we'll be here an hour after those US unemployment numbers on Friday. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. What happened this week? Well, we did see on Wednesday, the Dow Jones hit an all-time high. So the Dow, the more narrow US stock market, only 30 stocks, hit all-time highs. But then we did see this jump in bond yields yesterday, spooking markets. Gold and silver, new lows for the year in gold. I bought gold this week on my own account and on this account. In hindsight, not the greatest trade I've ever done so far. Let's see how it works out. But gold's interesting down here. I did a video yesterday on gold. And I just thought I'm just going to buy it because I don't want to go short it. So gold is a bit of a last chance saloon, I think, down at these levels. And I think it's already pushing to new lows for the year. So we'll take a look at that in a bit more detail. Bitcoin moved up through 50,000 this week, but again, it's given those gains up. Bitcoin, really volatile week in the crazy market that I never like, Bitcoin. Crude oil continues to push higher. Again, has sold off the last couple of days, but has been strong. Again, we'll take a look at that. I did an oil video this week, put an order in to get filled at 61. That got filled. Foreign exchange, an awful lot going on in FX. Pound against the dollar, getting nearer a 3-year high, but has reversed quite sharply. Euro dollar, I still think like it's building a base. We'll take a look at all of these. You don't need to keep typing gold in the chat, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to cover gold, so don't worry about it. We are going to get to gold. So lots of FX volatility due to the bond yields, the jump in US bond yields yesterday, and the concerns about inflation. And commodities as well. We'll take a look at those because we've seen some big moves in copper, cotton, sugar. So I will take a look at all of those as well because I've got loads of trades in those. Right, let's get into it. Where should we start? Let's start with stock markets. We're on. Let's bring up the S&P. Here we are. So let's start off with the daily first of all. I mean, clearly it's exciting. I think when markets move, I think we'll look at the NASDAQ as well. The NASDAQ had its biggest fall yesterday since November, I think. So we had big falls in stock markets yesterday. But you can see in the grand scheme of things, if we look back to March last year, we're still in this trend. And what is interesting on the S&P, you know, the moves we've seen this week, the knocks we've seen this week, have just knocked it back to that longer-term trend line. So I think it's interesting down here. You know, if we're following that longer-term trend line, to me, it still looks like a buying opportunity where the S&P is. That is the trade we might actually do today, actually, is the S&P. We'll kick things off with a trade straight away. And I think, for me, it's only if we start to lose. You know, we've been knocked back, but we're still well above the late January lows on the S&P at 36.65. We've got this old support at 3600 on the S&P. So we've got lots of support, you know, so even though it makes a great headlines, you can see the big red candle from yesterday, does it actually change that trend? I don't think so. You know, so for me, I bought some more S&P this week, actually. And I think I'm going to buy some now in this account. We do have some trades on the S&P running. I'm guessing they're a bit underwater. Yes, they are, but not near our stops yet. Let's do a trade. We always try and do at least one trade on these sessions. Let's do a trade on the S&P. Let's flip it over to an hourly. So I think what's interesting, even though the market's been hit quite hard, well, pretty hard yesterday, it did hold above the 23rd of February lows, so the lows from 3 days ago. So, you know, big fall off. But for me, I am going to take the view that actually that move is overdone. The move yesterday is overdone. So I am going to be a buyer of the S&P. Where's my stop going to go? The overnight lows for the S&P were at 38.04. The lower in the week was 38.08. So clearly my stop needs to go the other side of 3,800. So I'm going to go 37.90 for a stop on the S&P. Let's place that trade. So we normally, what did I say? 37.90. We normally risk 100 quid on the S&P trades. Oh, that's near enough. 105 quid. Okay, bye. Done. Right. So there we go. So we bought 2.5 S&P at 38.49. We'll see. We'll see how that one turns out. So we've added to our S&P trades in here. Oil is still by far and away the best performer on the account so far. So the trades this week were done at 61 on the video that went out, I can't remember, Tuesday I think of this week. So we'll see. We'll see how that turns out. So there's, I think stock markets are still strong. Let's take a look at the NASDAQ. You know, we did have a more dramatic fall in the NASDAQ yesterday. Let's just get rid of some of this stuff. But my money would be on these markets having a go at bouncing back today and into next week. So here's the NASDAQ. Here's our trend on the NASDAQ going back again to March last year. So we are 11 months into this. Slid yesterday. It slid overnight. It traded as low as 12,666. A very biblical reference there for the NASDAQ. Overnight, it's the lowest it's been since the 7th of January. Panic. NASDAQ hits 6-week lows. But for me, again, loads of support. 12,250 back here, December. 12,500 is big support for the NASDAQ. 12,750. So for me, the RSI, if you're a fan of RSIs, 10-day RSI, the RSI is oversold. So for me, I think it's a really interesting setup for next week. And I would probably be looking to be a buyer next week if I hadn't bought already. So interesting, bit of drama. But for me, at least, doesn't really change the bigger picture. Let's take a look at the DAX, the German market, and we'll look at the Japanese market as well, the Nikkei. Again, the DAX has been pretty boring anyway, to be honest. The DAX is sort of sticking there near all-time highs that we saw earlier in February. But for now, okay, got knocked back yesterday, but it only got knocked back to where it was at the beginning of the week. So again, I suppose, an aggressive trade on the DAX would be a buyer, stops below the low, 13,640. Maybe see if it sells off a bit this afternoon, and maybe be a buyer. But clearly, it's interesting lows, short-term lows down here. Let's take a look at the Nikkei, and then we'll move on to some other markets. Nikkei 225. I think we'll look at gold and silver next. Let's have a look at. There's the Nikkei again. Quite dramatic moves the last couple of days of the Nikkei. So Wednesday, the Nikkei closed at 30,200, and it's it's traded down to 29,000 overnight. So it's dropped 1,200 points at its extreme since Wednesday's close. But again, this is why it's interesting. All these markets here. The Nikkei has got a sharper trend it's been in since November. Is it just a pullback? No market moves in a straight line forever. Are these just pullbacks? Let's see what happens. But I think it's really interesting markets to watch, stock markets going into next week. So personally, I am looking to see if we're going to see the strength come back in next week. Right, let's take a look at gold. So I did this gold video yesterday, and I said in the gold video, I think when we were talking last week, I said that most of the trades I do for my own account will be different from the trades that I do on this account, because there are markets on this account that I'm not trading at the moment because I think they're boring. Gold is one of them, but because gold is popular on our channel, I always, we do videos on gold quite regularly, and I always try and do a trade on gold. So the trade I did yesterday, I was a buyer of gold. It's not looking very clever at the moment. I think it's interesting what's going on with gold. We had this low in November last year, which was only 3 months or so after the all-time high. So that the price had moved out to 2,075 near enough. Trades all the way back to 1760, 1763 in November. Then we get nearly a $200 rally off that low. Came back to it last week, And I thought, well, we'll see another bounce off, a little bounce. But look what it's done. It's just flopped. And here we are now at 1755. We're losing major support for gold, even as we speak. So the trade that I put on yesterday was a buyer with a stop at 1740, and really seeing if this old level can hold. And at the time of doing this, it doesn't look like it is. So we're seeing gold just losing support, pushing at the moment its worst level since June 2020. So we're at a 8-month low on gold at the moment. It looks weak, I think. It'd be interesting to see where it finishes today. But the fact, support levels are called support levels for a reason. We expect them to support the market. Previous lows, previous highs are resistance. So I think if we see gold continue to push throughout this level, it does confirm that we're in this downtrend off the highs, despite the false break in early January. And I think for me, the risk is it's going to push back into the old zone, from 1660 through to 1750. It doesn't change the longer term picture. We always come back to this longer term uptrend on gold when we look at gold. And it served as well till sort of March, April this year, and the price really took off. The longer term uptrend for gold is coming in around $1,500, let's say, give or take. So I still think it's a longer term buying opportunity, but it's how deep it goes from where we are now. The fact it's breaking down. It's not good, is it? It's not good. And considering how weak the US dollar has been in recent months, it did have a turnaround yesterday. Gold just seems really unloved at the moment. And I did the trade yesterday on the gold video to be a bit of a contrarian and say everyone thinks gold is going to go down, so I'm going to buy it. And so far it seems that everyone is correct to be bearish on gold. So it's an interesting one going into next week, but I do think the risk is for further weakness. Like I say, I haven't traded it much at all in my own account since these great trends here, because it's just been a bit scrappy and a bit messy, gold. But I think if it's going to bounce, it needs to get a move on and bounce now. Otherwise, I think we are going to see it drift further from here. So let's see what happens. Silver. Again, silver yesterday, so not surprising. Silver today and yesterday taking a bit of a hit from the highs of around $28.30. And I've said the last couple of live streams, I think gold and silver probably maybe more so. It's a really quite a boring market at the moment. It is the most popular market we cover on the YouTube channel, but it's just boring. It pretty much, I think I said last week, it was trading where it was a week ago. This week, it's trading where it was last week. So actually, in the great scheme of things, silver, if you go back to the end of January, it hasn't really moved that much. It's basically where it was at the end of January. It's been up, it's been down, but it's not really moved. Saying all of that, we do have this trend. I suppose if I change this trend to the November lows, we are still in that trend. So if we were following that medium-term trend, the weakness we're seeing on silver is still something of a buying opportunity from here. We've got lots of support on silver from the February the 4th lows, 25.89. Big support down at 24 for silver. So for me, if I was trading silver now, I'd find this quite interesting, this sell-off. I would be waiting. I wouldn't buy it today, but I'd wait to Monday. Do we see, does the price stabilize? Do we see the buyers come back in? So I can see someone's just said, what is the outlook for silver? I'd be a buyer on dips. I still think as long as it stays above $24 an ounce, medium term, I'd be looking for a run back up to 30. Yeah, so that trend is still up. I think the big risk here, if we are seeing, and who knows, right? There's the hourly trend on silver going back to the late November low. If this bond yields panic over the last 24 hours is the start of a major shift, is the start of maybe a change in the US Federal Reserve attitude, and I don't know, and no one knows, could we see a shift in sentiment towards the US dollar? And I think that's the big risk here. If we see a dollar comeback, and I talk about this a lot, but there's the trend in silver still up, so arguably still be a buyer. If we see a comeback in the US dollar, clearly that's going to put, this is the dollar we're looking at now, the dollar index. If we see this thing recover, clearly we are going to see, you'd expect more pressure on gold and silver from these levels. So we'll see. So I think the dollar index for me, I've got a small trade on the dollar index, which is currently losing money. I'm quite tempted to add to the position next week because look, this is the dollar index since March. So the dollar against a basket of currencies. The dollar's been really weak since last March. The index touched 104, sold off to 89, dropped 15%. Is it trying to stage a turnaround? It's broken out the trend line, downtrend. It's sold off, but it has held above the old low. So for me, if I was a buyer of the dollar index next week, my stop is going to go underneath the January the 6th lows. And this has implications for so many different markets, like the pound, the euro, gold, everything. Yeah, so let's see what happens. So that's it. That's gold and silver. We'll come back to FX in a bit more detail. Let's do Bitcoin. I did say I finally threw in the towel, didn't I? I said last week I threw in the towel and bought Bitcoin. And I said the danger is that's going to be the top. So far it has been the top. I think I bought on the break of 50. So I think I bought 51,750. I said I'd taken a small position in Bitcoin. So it ran up to 56 and it's come off a bit since then. So for me, even though I hate Bitcoin because I think it's a crazy market, the trend is still up. The trend is clearly up for Bitcoin, isn't it? If we go back to October last year, the trend is still up. It's accelerated since then. It's quite interesting what's happened today. If we flip this over to a short-term chart, we've got good short-term support for Bitcoin at about 44 from the 10th of Feb. So it's quite interesting that we've seen it bounce again today, Bitcoin. So I suppose an aggressive trade on Bitcoin is to be a buy now with a stop under 44,000. It's a $3,000 stop, but it was there. When was it there? 7 o'clock this morning. So however many hours ago that is, 8 hours ago. So I think it's interesting, Bitcoin. Lots of support. Even though I hate it, I can't deny the trend being up. And as a trend follower, I need to go with the trend. Have you missed the Nasdaq? Yes, you have. I looked at the Nasdaq. This is recorded, so you can watch the Nasdaq. You can watch it again. But basically, I think it's going to bounce back. I think stock markets are going to bounce back. That's what I think. But we'll come back to it and see. But so trend is up on Bitcoin for me. Even if it sells off to 32,000, it's still in that longer term trend, isn't it? From October last year. So I hate Bitcoin at the moment because I'm losing money on it. But we'll the trend is still up. Right, let's look at some other markets. Let's take a look at currencies. We're going to have a look at pound against the dollar. It was really interesting last week, I thought, because I had a few emails afterwards, and there's a bit of chat in the chat as well, and plenty of people were saying last week, they're going to go short. They're going to go short the pound because it can't go any higher. And this was last week. This was this time last week here. And of course, and I'd never comment. I never comment on other people's positions because who knows? No one's got a crystal ball. But it's always dangerous to go short what was, at then a runaway market. So last week the market did continue from 140 on the close last Friday, traded as high on Wednesday as 142.40. So we saw quite a run, and you've seen it's been clobbered. And I was saying, I'm long the pound. I'm long pound against the dollar, and I'm long sterling yen. And I was wondering, would there be a pullback this week? Actually, it's been the last couple of days. I think this is a really interesting setup for next week now because I'm still going to be a buyer. So for me, the trend on pound against the dollar still clearly up. The market has turned around almost 300 points since that Wednesday high. And I'll be looking next week for the buyers to come back in. So I'm still bullish. We've got trend support around 138. We've got big support, which again, let's not forget, is only 3 weeks ago down at 135, so 400 points below where we are now. So basically, I feel like we've got stacks of support for pound against the dollar. So a sell-off like this, to me, is welcome, and it's just a question of, right, do we see some stability and time to buy in? I suppose if you wanted to buy now, the aggressive place for a stop is under the lows from Thursday of last week, 138.30, that sort of area. But for me, we've had 2 days of sell-off, but we've had 11 months of this market going up, So I think it's interesting to see what happens this week and next week. Same for the euro, same thing for the euro. To be honest, I still bullish on the euro, mate. We've got the trend coming off the lows in March, the March lows. Trend line coming in at 116. Market pushed up to a multi-year high in January. So the euro traded up to its best levels since April 2018. sold off, holds, tries to build, and I think, have we got a little trend going on in February? Let's take a look. There we go. So if we picked up on the February trend, this is Euro US dollar. Nice little sell-off yesterday. Doesn't really change, or doesn't change the trend for February. So I think it's really interesting. So for me, I would be expecting the euro and the pound to go higher into next week. So let's see what happens. But so it's an interesting couple of days. What other markets? We'll look at oil. Then I'll talk about some other markets I find interesting. Then we'll go into the questions. Still long oil on the account. Someone's just asked, why is your P&L only $700? Some profits have been taken. I think I came out of some of the oil trades this week, and the pound against the dollar trade. That came out this week. The number you should watch is the equity. I wouldn't watch so much the open profits, because clearly that will change, but the equity. So the equity peak this week was 17,700. When we did the thing last week, the equity was at 17,000. But coming back to crude oil, we did this trade on this week on crude oil from the video, buying at 61 with a stop at 56.5. The market's currently 62.60. The trend is still up on crude. You know, it's only yesterday it hit its highest levels since, I'm presuming, January last year. There is this massive problem area at 65.50 from early January. But for me at the moment, it has been, on this account, the most profitable market this year, crude oil, basically, because we've just been buying into the trend and buying dips. It's interesting, we've had another dip overnight, or not overnight, this morning, and the buyers over the last couple of hours have come back in. That is a trend in crude oil. Clearly, that is a trend. So for me, I'm just trading with the trend. So my target for crude oil going into next week is going to be a run back up to these highs, 63.5 highs. I'd expect it to break out to new highs for the recovery, crude oil from here. But I'm cautious that we are back up. You know, look at these old highs from Jan last year, $65.40, that sort of area. It's going to be really interesting, I think, crude oil in the weeks ahead. But the trend is still up for this one. So let's see. So what would change my mind if we started breaking some important levels? You know, if we started breaking below, at the very least, if I was going to go short crude, at the very least, I would want to see it break below these lows that are only, again, from 2 days ago, $60.50, and probably have a proper break below 59 to think the trend is changing in crude. So let's see what happens. So that's crude oil. So that's our usual markets that we cover. I'll talk about some of the markets I find interesting and some of the markets people are mentioning. Then I'll go through the questions properly. Natural gas. Natural gas yet again has been a bit of a bogey market for me. I am long natural gas in my own account, not in this one. I've been dragging the stop up to break even, and I think I'm about to get stopped out for nothing on natural gas. But I was following this trend up and hoping, this was last week on natural gas when we were looking at it, come back to the trend line. I was hoping we were going to get a squeeze this week, but we've had completely the opposite of a squeeze, haven't we? We've had just the market going down every day. So natural gas looks quite weak, I suppose, in that. I think if I didn't have a trade on, I think it's a buying opportunity somewhere on natural gas. I suppose the aggressive trade on natural gas, let's flip it over to an hourly. Oh, I don't think it is a good trade, though. I mean, that was the trend I was following, which was doing a great job until this week. We've got, we do have support pretty much down here on natural gas. It's such a funny market, though. It's really, once it starts moving, it can be really volatile. I suppose the aggressive trade is to be a buyer with a stop the other side of 270. I think 270 was my big level for natural gas, and it has stopped. Personally, I'm not going to trade anything today on my own account because I want to see things settle down a bit after the madness of the last couple of days and see if we have a calmer finish to the week. So natural gas for me could be a potential buy on Monday or Tuesday of next week. But I'm a little bit disappointed that it hasn't got a move on after the support last Friday. So I think it's an interesting one going into next week. Let's see if 270 holds. I think if 270 doesn't hold, then perhaps we drift back into where we were for January for natural gas. So for me, it's sort of bounce or bust time, really, for natural gas for me down at these levels. The other markets that I look at, copper We talked about this last week. Oh, I've just been stopped out of my gold trade. That was the gold trade from yesterday. Oh dear, gold is really falling. We'll have a look at gold in a sec. But copper, again, I said this has been a brilliant, brilliant market in recent months for me. Great trend in copper. Only yesterday punched out to its best levels since, I think it's an 8-year high. Is it getting near a 10-year high? Best levels since 2011, July 2011. So 9.5-year high yesterday. So again, this is interesting, because clearly it's a market that had really, really run away and shown some fantastic strength. And has sold off the last couple of days. So for me, it doesn't change that bigger trend for copper, obviously. During February, it has really accelerated away from that trend line. If we see further weakness for copper next week, to me, it just looks like a buying opportunity, waiting for the strength to come back in and see what happens. Cotton, I do have a trade on cotton in this account. I think it's one of those videos, I think I mentioned it, one of the videos we did that had absolutely zero interest from people. So it's been running since January, and it's done okay. Cotton and sugar, I mentioned the two markets that I've traded quite a bit in recent months. Massive move against me yesterday in cotton, sorry. Look at that, massive candle yesterday. But again, a great trend in cotton off the lows from April. Punches up to 95 yesterday and just completely reverses and gives up about a week's worth of gains in one day. But again, the trend is still up, so I think it's a really interesting market going into next week. So many of these markets with great trends were hit hard yesterday. So the question is, do we return back to like going back into the trend next week? So I think it's really interesting. So again, for me, with all these markets, I am not panicking and thinking, oh God, I need to sell short. I'm thinking, okay, they've been knocked back. We're still within the trend. I want to be a buyer, so let's see. So that's cotton. Sugar, then we'll have a look at platinum, which I think platinum's really changed. That's been a great trending market. Sugar, again, is one I'd mentioned. It's been a great... One of the things I look at, I've got a spreadsheet that documents all of my trades and stuff. One of the things that I have on my spreadsheet, where is my most open profit at the moment? What trades have got the most open profit? And earlier this week, it was sugar. So I did tighten up my take profit stops on sugar, fortunately. So I've come out of some of the trades. So again, we've seen sugar under pressure over the last 4 days, but the trend is still up. So I still think it's interesting market. Platinum, then I'll take a look at some of the questions. Platinum, again, has got really knocked back, had been really strong. Early Feb, really ran away. It's got knocked back, but that trend is still up. So again, I think it's such an interesting week next week because all of this stuff is getting knocked back. Are we going to see these trends resume? So stuff that had looked really overextended is getting knocked back. So I think it's going to be a fascinating week next week. I think so. I'm really looking forward to it, to be honest. I won't be doing any trading today for my own account, but I think next week it's going to be really fascinating. Oh, I did mention I was going to set up a Facebook page just to put up markets and stuff. So I put my email up at the end. But if you go to davidjonestrading.com, how original, davidjonestrading.com. I am going to post up more market stuff on that during the week, but of course you can email me on the Capital address that I give at the end. I'll put all that stuff up as well. But let me jump into the comments and have a look what people are asking for. Had a look at gold. Let's have a quick look at gold because it's clearly moving down. There you can look at that. So I had my stop at 1740 from yesterday's video, so I got stopped out on that. It's really weak, doesn't it? Really, it's going to be interesting to see where it finishes today. But for me, if it ends up down here, if we don't see some fantastic turnaround by the end of the day, you'd expect it to continue on drifting. There's another stop come out. There we go. Look at that, live getting stopped out of trades. Yeah, not so good. Not so good, the gold trade at the moment. So I think for me, the risk is we're going to drift back. I suppose my next target for gold would be a drift back to these old lows. 1660, maybe 1650. The lows from April to June last year. Let's see what happens with gold next week. There's gold. Let's have a quick look. Gold, we had a look at gold ETF. Dollar Canada. That's an interesting market. The dollar against the Canadian dollar. Let's have a look at that one. So that was Tyler asked for that market. It does tend to move, I think, occasionally. And dollar yen we should look at as well, actually. That's always an interesting one. And sterling yen. Dollar is still weaker. This is much weaker than the dollar index. So we're seeing just yesterday, the dollar against the Canadian dollar slipped to its lowest in, where have we got to go back to? Got to go back to about February 2018. So a 3-year low for the dollar against the Canadian dollar. So for me, as a dedicated trend follower, I would be looking to sell into strength on this one. It's an interesting market there. So I would be looking for, what I would look for is the first day of weakness, and maybe you have to be a bit more aggressive than that. But I would look for a candle like this one here that doesn't push out to a new high. And then I'd look to sell short with a stop above perhaps the most recent high, whatever it is. It's a really interesting market. So I'll have a look at dollar yen. I would still be tempted to be a seller. I suppose if you wanted to sell it now, the dollar against the Canadian dollar, you can be a seller now at 126.50 and a stop above here, 127.40 or 127.60. But that's a really interesting market, that one. Let's come back to that next week, because it's if you look at, we'll have a look at dollar yen in a minute. That's a really weak dollar currency pair, that one. So we'll come back to that. But yeah, I'll be looking to sell into strength. But let's look at dollar yen while I've remembered, because I was thinking about buying that more recently, and I think I've missed it again, actually, on dollar yen. Let's pick it up. So the daily chart. I think my broadband has slowed down a little bit, which is a bit annoying. Just hold on a second. Let me just let's make sure no one's hammering the broadband. Let me just see. I think I might have missed it on gold. Can you do an educational video on SPACs? SPACs. I don't know. I know very little about them. So I'd just Google it. That's these new US investment vehicles, isn't it? That's getting listed to take over other companies. So no, I don't know anything about SPACs, but it's the next big thing, isn't it? I've seen a lot of talk about it, but I'm not an expert on that. Gold, a lot of gold. Cocoa. Let's take a look at cocoa, because again, I do have a trade on that. If I could spell it, I do have a trade on that one. Let's bring that one up. My broadband still seems to be a little bit stuttery on a Friday afternoon. There we go. So cocoa, so I missed it. I remember I was looking at this last week, and I was saying, oh, it's a buying opportunity. We've got this great trend that's been running since April. And I was wondering if we get a sell-off. So we were looking at it about here. I was wondering if we get a bit of a sell-off. And it actually has raced higher. So the trend for cocoa is still up. The problem I'd have is where would my stop loss go? The most aggressive place I'd want for a stop is underneath the most recent lows, those mid-Feb lows at 24.50. I'd much rather buy it if it sells off more towards 23, but that trend is definitely still up on cocoa. CHRS, Coherus Bioscience, never heard of them. Let's have a look. CHRS. No, we don't cover it, that one. So that's no, it's a little bit too obscure, I'm afraid. That one. Natural gas. We looked at natural gas. Euro sterling. I wonder what's happened with euro sterling the last couple of days, because the euro was really weak against the pound. It's made a bit of a comeback. So so this is the euro against the pound exchange rate. I must admit, I hardly ever look at this one. It tends to be quite a range-bound market, but clearly in recent weeks it has broken lower. So traded down to its worst levels since about a year ago. Oh, I can't believe this. I'm not sure if I'm still connected because I'm trying to get a broadband speed test, and even that page isn't coming up at the moment, so I'm not quite sure what's going on. And I can't see anything in the chat either to see if anybody can actually still hear it. No, it's not a platform issue. It's my broadband issue. Oh, I think it's come back actually. Hang on a second. I think it has come back. Hold on a second. Everything completely died for me at my end. Hang on a sec. Let's all have a little stretch, shall we? While it all gets back to normal. Let's do something. Do a bit of yoga when everything comes back to normal. Oh, it's definitely at my end. What a pain. I think everything's coming back. Hold on a sec. Right, it's back. Let's carry on. Let's carry on as normal. Let's pretend that never happened. What was I looking at? Can't remember. Right, I'm back. I don't know if anyone's still here, but hang on a second. If I find the microphone. I think it must be. It's the falling gold price is just causing havoc everywhere. Let me just make sure that is streaming. So for those of you who are still here, I think I've still got the questions anyway. So I'll flip back, look at those markets that we were looking at. Hold on a second. So what were we looking at? Euro sterling, weren't we? We were looking at. Hang on a sec. So Euro GBP, and I think there's maybe like a volatility trade there. There we go. So here's some Bollinger Bands on Euro sterling, and I suppose you could take the view that it's moved to the extreme from the Bollinger Bands, and maybe we're going to see it rotate its way back up to more normal trading. But I do find it something of a difficult market to trade. I think Euro sterling. So we had a look at that one. We had a look at the S&P and silver. Let's have a quick look at what is actually happening with gold now. 1730. It is absolutely plummeting, isn't it? Let's just get rid of those Bollingers. So gold is definitely experiencing, look at that, something of a rout this afternoon. We looked at natural gas, copper. We looked at copper, platinum. We looked at platinum as well. Let's take a quick look at copper and see. Is this actually? It's not getting. I was wondering, are we just seeing a broader sell-off for everything and a run to the US dollar? We're not seeing it in copper. Someone's asking about a buy level for copper. I would just be waiting to see what happens next week with we're in that trend for copper. Where does the sell-off stop? So for me, it's if we did see a bit of strength early next week, I'm probably going to want to have my stop the other side of 380, that sort of level. So we'll see how it goes. What else have we got? Copper, dollar, South African rand. Let's have a quick look at that one. So dollar against the rand. There we go. Dollar against the rand. We did look at this one the other week. I suppose you could take the view, an aggressive trade here on dollar against the rand is that we are forming for the dollar some sort of base. We came back to about 14.5 in December, rallied, came back again, had a little look below it, but didn't really get any follow through in Feb, and the market stabilized. So for me, perhaps we'll see it push back up above 1550. If I was a buyer, the tightest I'd want my stop would be the other side of these more recent lows. The more recent lows around about 1440, that sort of area. and then perhaps we get a run back up to 15.58, that sort of level. So I think it's a really interesting market, and clearly we're seeing a lot of dollar strength at the moment. Tesla. Let's have a look at Tesla, because again, Nasdaq took one of the biggest hits yesterday. What's Tesla doing? I think I mentioned last time I sold all my shares in Tesla. All my shares, all 2 of them that I bought before my son went to uni. So I sold those in Tesla, and I think there were some trades in Tesla open on this account, weren't there? That should have gone as well. I think, yeah, that's long gone as well. But let's get back to the Tesla share price. It's really interesting, isn't it? Here we are on Tesla. The trend from March last year, so 11 months into this trend, that comes in at 500. They had traded as high as 900 in Jan, and still weak. So it's another. There are so many markets after the last few days that look like this, that look really interesting, and maybe we'll see these markets under a bit more pressure. So for me on Tesla, clearly the whole 500 to 600 area is really interesting. I suppose if we were looking for a buy entry point on Tesla, I would be watching that low from the 23rd of February. So it traded down to 620. And we have held above it so far. So I suppose if you really thought Tesla was a bargain now, you could be a buyer. And the closest I want my stop is the other side of 620. So yeah, let's see what happens with that one. But an interesting one to keep coming back to, Tesla. Qualcomm, we looked at those of the week, didn't we? And they were holding above the trend, but I wonder, they must have slipped. Are they slipping below it? They're right on it by the looks of it. Qualcomm, look at that. So many. It's like the Nasdaq, isn't it? When we looked at the Nasdaq, they're all pulling back to their longer-term trends. So again, for me, I'd be looking to be a buyer. It's just a question of where your stop goes. Do we want to see a bit more support? Before we do that. But it really is all these markets. Let's have a look at the Nasdaq. We'd really expect to see, would be expecting to see some strength coming in. Now let's have a look at the Nasdaq on an hourly. So lots of tech stock shares are looking a bit like that at the moment. Let's take a look on an hourly. Oh, it's just pretty choppy at the moment, isn't it? There's not much going on so far today. We're an hour into the day, aren't we, in the US? So let's see what happens. Did copper, and we did natural gas and Tesla. What's your opinion on 10-year treasuries? I really don't have one. It's not a market that I look at, 10-year treasuries. I had something interesting while I'm back on. I mentioned that last week we talked a lot about trading, and I said how it was important that your winners had to be bigger than your losers. If you have a trading strategy where when you're right you make $50, but when you're wrong you lose $100, you're never going to be profitable. You're not going to be right 70-80% of the time. And I mentioned that on this account, I reckoned that this account's been running for 18 months. This is the account we do for the videos. And I mentioned that I thought that most trades would have been losers. What I actually did, I downloaded every trade this account had done since it started in August 2019. So there are some trades that were partial fills, but it will all even out in terms of profit or loss. So in total, it's done closed trades when I ran this a few days earlier this week. It's done 424 trades on this account in 18 months. What I did, I sorted them by losers to winners. Average losing trade lost £73. Like I say, there's lots of sort of partial fills in there. I was right 44% of the time. So out of all of the trades, 56% were losers, but the account was still up about 70%. And this is the reason why. The average losing trade, 73 quid. The average winner, I was quite surprised by this, £141. So almost 2 to 1 on this account that we use for these videos. How it's turned out over the last 18 months, the average losing trade is half the average winning trade. So even though I've been right just under half of the time, clearly it's shown a profit because the winners have been much bigger than the losers. And you'll see that in the portfolio. If we look at, there's clearly quite a few losing trades in there at the moment, but we have like some of the big winners in there. Oh, what's that getting closed? That's my S&P getting closed. Quite a few big winners in there, like the crude oil trade, that makes up for a few losing trades. So that ratio between winners and losers, really, really important. Silver, we looked at silver. We looked at that. Mexico, fuel from Mexico. We looked at dollar South African. Dollar Turkish lira. Let's have a look at that one. So US dollar TRY. TRY, there we go. Wow. So massive dollar strength there. Where are we on the dollar? Look at that. So the dollar. So what we're seeing here, it clearly is, I think, more Turkish lira weakness, isn't it? So the dollar against the Turkish lira, it's really turned it around. It's quite interesting again from a trend point of view. The dollar against the Turkish lira broke out of the trend. The dollar broke out of the trend last year, actually. This time last year. No, it's not. It's this year. What am I talking about? I'm looking at an hourly chart, aren't I? See, it's really knocked me off. That that's it. That's really interesting, that move. So that's the downtrend from November 2020. We've broken out the downtrend for dollar against the Turkish lira. What I would really like now is a pullback to get a trade on. But at the moment, at least, it doesn't look like we're getting it, does it? So I don't know. So I think that's another interesting one. It's not a market that I would normally watch, but it's another interesting one to watch going into next week to see if we get a pullback. So the ideal setup for me, sells off a bit next week, then we get a stability and we get a move higher. A bit like what we've been seeing in dollar yen in recent weeks. The zigzag higher, breaks out of the downtrend, pulls back, pulls up, sells off, and so it goes on. We're seeing quite a lot of dollar strength this afternoon, aren't we? Let's bring up the US dollar index. How's that moving? That gold chart does not look pretty, does it? Okay, let's see. Let's see what else have we got. Dollar Mexico. So dollar against the Mexican peso. Let's take a look at that. Let's bring up a daily chart on that. See what that looks like. Again, breaking out. There's lots of these charts, isn't there, where the dollar is breaking out. I do wonder, I've said it a few times, are we going to see a dollar comeback this year? And that clearly has implications for lots of different markets. It's going to be really interesting. But clearly, strength for the dollar against the Mexican peso. Dollar hitting its best level since November last year. Again, for me, a bit like the dollar yen chart that we've seen. We've got this new trend going since Jan. If we had a bit of weakness next week, it looks like an opportunity, I think, in that one. Right. David, could you please explain what is the new insights page on the bottom left? And could you please look at the Litecoin crypto market? What is the new insights page? Oh, this. Do you know? I haven't seen it before. I haven't seen it. I don't know. Oh, we've taken in. Oh, it's a third party, I think, called Trading Central, and they provide. I think it's like an economic calendar, isn't it? All of that sort of stuff. So you can look at that. Upcoming events. Oh, that's really useful, actually. I hadn't noticed that. That must have just been updated this week. That's what it is. Analyst view. What's that? I think they have their own analysts. So they provide. I think it's like robotic and automated technical analysis. I have to hold my hand up here and say it's something I never look at and never would look at because I'm quite happy doing my own technical analysis. But if you want to have a look at some independent research, that's in the insights page there. So I think for a lot of people, that thing is really useful. So there you go. That's there. Well spotted. And Litecoin, I've got no opinion. I don't think I've ever even looked at a chart of Litecoin. I can't get it for reasons I've said before. UK resident, using a UK platform, we're not allowed to trade leverage things on crypto. Okay. So, but that insights thing, yeah, have a look at that. Right, carry on scrolling through and catch up with it. GameStop. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see that yesterday. The move in GameStop again. I mean, how do you trade it? You can't even. How do you trade something that goes from $50 to 180 yesterday and it's 117 today? I really was not expecting that thing to spark back into life. But I would say these are just fruit machines. These aren't markets. These crazy moves you see. So no opinion on GameStop. Gold. I don't think I've got any gold trades now. Then I think that's it for me on gold in this account. That's it. Yeah, no more gold. Oh, actually, there is that gold trade. There's a bit of a trade still left with it from an earlier video that we did with a stop a bit further away. But yeah, that looks really ugly, isn't it? It's a really ugly day for gold today. So it's back to its worst levels since, well, it's 6 month, 8 month low, isn't it? So there we go. When do you think the market will react to the stimulus on the Nasdaq? I don't know. I think it's going to be. We've got this the speech next week, haven't we, from the head of the Fed on Thursday, I think it is next week. So that could be interesting. I think when we have that, but it's a really interesting time in markets at the end of the week. Oh, even the S&P is getting hit again. The S&P is below yesterday's lows. There's a lot going on today, isn't there? Nasdaq is pushing again towards yesterday's lows. I think it's going to be a really interesting finish to today. It's definitely a day when I'm glad I'm just going to sit it out and see what happens and come back to it on Monday. Let's see what else. What else have we got? If someone was asking about how deep could a correction go on the S&P, for me that's the level to watch. We've got trendline support. We've got big support at 3,600. So for me, there's still an awful lot of support below where we are now. It's always easy, I think, to get carried away when we have big moves like we've had the last couple of days. But let's not forget, it was less than 2 weeks ago. We saw all-time highs. So let's see. Soybeans. Do you know soybean? We don't cover soybeans, but I'll open up my third-party package because we did have a look at it last week, soybeans. And it did look like it was going to break out this week. After me saying, or soybeans, I should say, it looked like, here we go, if I bring it up, there's the soybeans chart, and it looked like, it did actually yesterday, it hit its best levels for, how far have we got to go back on soybeans? Oh, I don't have that much data actually. But soybeans was looking interesting again. So I think that's another one to watch. All of these commodities, again, are clearly getting hit today. But I think that's another one to watch going into next week. I'm still long soybeans, and I was looking to add. But I'm going to wait for all the madness to stop a little bit before I add in to that position. HCMC. Let's see, HCMC. Oh, we don't cover that one. It's not Home Capital Group, is it? I don't think it is. No, we don't cover HCMC. Natural gas, we did natural gas. Would you buy gold now? Personally, no, I wouldn't buy gold now. But that's my own personal opinion. I don't have a crystal ball, and none of this is financial advice. Natural gas, we've looked at natural gas earlier. And I think actually that's it. I think we've done it. There's so much. Again, there's so much to watch next week now. For me, everything is going to be interesting next week because we are seeing so much volatility. For me, for the markets I watch, the interesting ones are the pound and the euro. So the major markets are interesting. Crude oil, because that trend is still up, but are we going to get more of a correction from here? Copper, because we have had such a runaway market now for during February. Where does it correct to? Gold, I'm not really interested in because the longer term trend is up, but clearly now we're seeing a really weak market. So I've got, for me there, two pretty much conflicting trends. And the US dollar, is what is spooking the market now yields on longer term bonds. Is this the sign of a change in sentiment towards the US economy and the US dollar? So I think, perhaps we will look back on this day in 6 months' time and think, well, that's when really we saw a big shift in sentiment. So I think the US dollar is the really interesting one to watch next week. But there's so much opportunity if we do see, some stability come back in, and see what happens. Let me put up the details. So I said at the beginning, sorry, it's been a little bit disjointed because of our technical thing today. But obviously, to find out more about Capital, go to Capital.com. You can open an account, you can download our app, you can be up and running really quickly. I'm going to put more content out there. If you go to davidjonestrading.com, it's just a simple Facebook page I set up just to put up some market thoughts and answer some questions. If you want to email me directly, you can email me david.jones@capital.com. I had quite a few emails after last week, so I'm more than happy to answer any general trading questions via email. Clearly, again, we can't give financial advice. And on Twitter, I'm @JonesTheMarkets on Twitter. And of course, follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And we'll put some more videos up next week. And I think it's going to be, it's really interesting. I think it's great when markets are moving like this and you're in a trade and it's brilliant and you just clock up profit every day. But it's also interesting when we have the sort of volatility that we're seeing today and yesterday in markets. What does this mean? And it can definitely offer up more opportunity. So we'll do it all again next week. Next week is the payrolls. Hopefully markets will be a bit calmer next Friday. I will do whatever I need to do with my broadband to try and make sure we actually have a smooth live stream for once. But thanks for coming along. I do enjoy doing them. Go to Capital.com to find out more. We'll wrap things up there, and let's see if these markets carry on crazy for the rest of today. And now I've completely lost the page to stop the stream. Oh, here it is.